Most of my life, I've been told I needed to find Jesus. Seek ye, and ye shall find salvation, and whatnot. Like Indiana Jones in the many temples of spiritual doom, I went on a hunt for that lost relic, the Holy Grail, metaphorically speaking, of course. My quest to find Jesus, with a whole lot of logical booby traps along the way. For instance, the only reason I was even looking for him was luck of the geographical and genealogical draw. When I talk about religion, I'm talking often about the non-consensual religion of my birth, the one I didn't choose, the one I was forced into every Sunday against my will. So if you get cross or sideways about something I say or post on social media, ask yourself maybe how you can do better. We all know I'm a dick. Don't waste your time on that. Trust me, that ship has sailed. Focus on the point behind my words and realize my words are almost always deliberate. Like a puzzle, a riddle if you will, designed to make you think about something in a slightly different perspective. Salt in the wounds? No. Salt for a little explosion of flavor. In this one, I'm seeking Jesus, folks, and deconstructing my journey through faith. And welcome to the podcast. I wasn't a kid of strong faith. Maybe I was too smart for that. Maybe that sounds harsh. I'm certain it was more trauma than brains. Still, whatever everyone else was getting out of all the holy rolling up and down the aisles, I just wasn't there. It didn't matter what church, what congregation, or, with all due respect, what preacher, what atrocious music, whatever. Me in church, it just never felt right. Not to get too much into my personal beliefs, I'm not here to convince you to believe what I believe. That is cultism. And one thing I don't need, no one needs, a Josh Brandon cult. But it's necessary for me to break down that personal wall I've built up around everyone regarding religion and faith. I have to talk about this intimate subject for me, especially when it's such a large part of how I see the world around me. There was simply no way to do this show, to explore these topics without delving into my religion. I don't discuss my religion, because I don't really have one, if I'm being honest. I discarded religion for spirituality a long time ago, in the earliest phases of my deconstruction process. Now, when I talk about religion, I'm certainly not talking about mine. I discuss everyone else's fairy tales, and I call them that because I believe that's how they're regarded, like some glorified Aesop's fables, but with consequences everybody ignores. Imagine what would happen if those of us who truly have faith would regard our Maker with the esteem and respect deserved of such power and omniscience. In these next 2 episodes, I'm deconstructing my own personal journey through religion, spirituality, philosophy, and faith. These are subjects that are all intertwined, or it seems they should be, but they're also independent of one another. Religion is what you practice. Faith is what you preach. Spirituality is what you are. Philosophy is what you believe. Simplified. We covered in Selling Our Souls how feeble our own reasoning can be when forming opinions, and why it's important to our eternal salvation that we do our due diligence of making sure our motivations behind these moral dilemmas is sound. In order to do better looking forward, we need to pick apart the past to preserve a more precise and pragmatic perspective. In this series of Overthinking Everything, I'm overthinking myself, deconstructing my culture of cultism. I'm putting myself on the couch and taking a deep dive into my own journey through this world. I seek to understand why we have this chasm of divisiveness in our society. And since I came from one side and have sort of evolved into the other, I believe I have a unique perspective through which to examine this divide. Why do people fall in line with political cultism and then be led off the cliff like lemmings? In the next few episodes, I'm breaking down my political journey as well as my religious journey, my journey through the professional world, and my personal and social journey. And it's all relevant in explaining why these people are the way they are. We aren't that different, you see. We're all sort of the same. As I'll explain coming up in the next episode, Define, Redefine. This episode is about my personal journey through deconstruction and then finding faith in the aftermath. There were some key catalyst moments that sort of catapulted me out of traditionalist Christianity, which who knows how that could have ended up. I think about it sometimes. I look at my cousins and the extremists today I know in the world, my family, my friends, people that I've known, former coworkers, how easily they've been swayed. Looking at how close I came to that, knowing how these people and knowing people that are really close to that, it's frightening. So, what did it for me? How did I see the light without, seeing the light? Growing up in the Southern non-denominational churches, I have to say one question of, or doubt maybe, prevailed more than any other. Why me? This is a victim mentality then steeped in trauma and mental illness. It's taking circumstance and happenstance personally and assigning some delusions of grandeur on your position in the universe's hierarchy. As in, why you? Like all of reality is dependent on you forgetting to take the trash to the road last night. Like that question that haunted my childhood. In relation to my relationship with God, it bred this more psychologically warped internalization and indoctrination trauma response. Am I good enough for God? It's this question that led me down the deconstructing rabbit hole decades before I even knew the term. There seemed to be this thing that people I knew felt about church, a feeling or something. Everyone seemed so content in their pews, nodding and standing and sitting and standing and kneeling and paying off their sins and doing the body and the blood rituals. I just wasn't plugged into it. I was looking around more interested in why these people all collectively gathered for this loose, seemingly unimportant ritual of obligation more than anything else. Church was just that. It seemed like an obligation more than something most people were excited about doing. A means to an end, a never-ending means to an eternal end, so to speak. I remember growing up a lost and depressed kid, suicidal, angry at the world. My humor was a coping mechanism, and my personality wasn't quite in line with my churchy upbringing. I never really felt like I belonged anywhere, much less church. Those people always seemed better at humaning than I did. Seemed. We were pretty consistent churchgoers for as long as I can remember. Then we fell off right around the time my parents' marriage fell off. Dad made several swings to get us back into church here or there, but it wasn't until I was in high school when we moved back and settled into my dad's hometown that we had a consistent church home. By then, my grandmother's church, all the kids had kind of grown up together, and I was the kid who visited his granny here and there. These kids had memories and cliques by the time I started going regularly. And the closest thing I really came to that sort of camaraderie was the summer I was forced into the mountains to church camp, which was one of the single worst weeks of my childhood. A catalyst moment in and of itself. I didn't belong here, there, or anywhere with these people. I wasn't like them, any of them. I tried. Most of my life has been spent listening to appeals from spiritual leaders, people I love and respect, people telling me to get my life right, get back into church, give my life and worries over to Jesus. So much of my existence on this planet has been spent being lectured to about integrity, ethics, morality, and character, and being told in one way or another that I was wrong for being me. Things I never really thought were all that evil, just natural, normal. Boy, was their judgment for it. Not just religiously, but I wasn't Southern enough or Christian enough or something. I was just never enough, it seemed. When I was a kid, I was head over heels in love with the preacher's daughter. I thought she hung the moon. She's still a fantastic person, but boy, I had 4 big crushes of my childhood, and she was one. I remember standing in line at a potluck after church. So we're standing in line waiting to get the food. I'd been gone for a while, traveling a little bit with my mom, also trying to find some open mics and do some stand-up comedy where nobody I knew could see me. Well, she just thought that was fascinating. Here I was in high school trying to get into comedy clubs. "Tell us some of your jokes," she said. I immediately got uncomfortable. You see, my humor then was, my goal wasn't to make you laugh so much as it was to make you uncomfortable. I've always sort of studied people. Making people uncomfortable has always been far more enthralling to me than laughter. Believe me, I've addressed that in therapy. But just that kind of pushing people outside of their closed-in little boxes of thought uncomfortable. You know what I mean? Like, a monkey can make you laugh. I want to make you think or get so pissed you walk out. Needless to say, I limited my stand-up appearances. I didn't deal as well with rejection as I do now. Well, this girl of my dreams, man, she just asked me for delivery, and I had nothing to give her. Nothing that was suited for the basement of the church reception hall. You know what I mean? Like, I was like, I don't really think this is the place for my jokes, if I'm being honest. And then she just stiffened, man. She was like, "Josh, if your jokes aren't good enough for God, you shouldn't tell them anywhere." I know she didn't mean anything by it. And I don't hold it against her to this day, but it was a catalyst moment for me because I had this idyllic crush on this girl and kind of always put her on this really unfair pedestal of what the perfect girl was. And then I realized something about that was enlightening to me. I had no chance. I never would have. I was a year younger than her. She was into guys a little older, I think. It was a schoolyard crush thing like boys get on pretty girls they're too scared to talk to. It was a crush on a girl who came from a normal, good family of happy, loving people. I never had a chance. I realized I was different. Different than what I thought ideal was anyway. I realized in order for me to fit in with what I thought normal or ideal was, I had to be really fake. I couldn't be me. I had to act normal. This realization would also come about in various stages and areas of my life, the square peg in a round hole. I was torn with my spiritual self as it was, feeling like I couldn't ever really belong because of how my mind worked. The sugary, frosted side of my personality wanted to be loved and accepted and get whatever they were getting out of that whole church experience, but the crusty, shredded, weedy side of my personality wanted to tell dick jokes. But it was then that I knew that someone else's idea of God wasn't going to cut it for me. And I began seeking answers to my questions. Well, it's when I began asking questions, I should say. While my accomplishments as a young adult made my family proud, it's safe to say I wasn't the grandson my granny wished I was. I think she wanted me to be one of those kids that grew up to be a deacon or something, you know? Granny's best friend's son was the preacher, and, well, Dad walked his own path, and Daddy didn't give me hell when I did too. Maybe we both felt a little inadequate compared to my grandmother's devotion to her Bible. Still, I really never felt like I belonged in church, in my family, in school, anywhere. So I struggled a lot with self-identity, to find my place in this world amongst the humans, much less to find my spiritual place at peace with my own faith. I have no idea how to compare my journey with that of someone struggling with their own identity, but except to say that knowing what it's like not to fit in to somebody else's description is traumatic. How often do we go through life believing things that someone else told us to believe? About ourselves. About everything. Honestly, I can't say that many people outwardly cast stones, so to speak. It was just this feeling, remarks, comments, microaggressions, insecurities, anxiety, so much so that it affected every aspect of my life and decision-making. It affected who I dated and whom I didn't. Hell, it's safe to say that the first time I really felt feelings for a fella, I blew that friendship the fuck up, because who wants to burn in hell and lose everybody you love just because you think a boy is cool to hang out with, right? I struggled for a long time trying to be this cardboard cutout version of what everybody else thought I should have been. But then, hyperbolically speaking, of course, the deacon has an affair, and your teacher's banging one of the cheerleaders, your local DARE officers coaching middle school sports for the dates, and I'm not talking about the moms, and a local judge gets suicide murdered in a big cover-up, and you begin seeing some truths about the actual world that make it hard to see the world through the innocent spectacles of naivete. Ultimately, it leads me to a conclusion that none of it really matters. The things we cling to as so important. When push comes to shove, we're cool with breaking the rules, even the basic human rules, because nothing really matters. So why are we fighting? As that confused boy in church, I tried extra hard to pay close attention. I'd read along, focusing on the words. I'd pause and listen, but it never made much sense. So I'd read ahead for context and boredom. One Sunday, on the rare occasion I actually felt anything remotely spiritual or supernatural in church, I was really into the preacher's sermon. I was so enthralled by his passage he was focused on. It was for me, like he knew and was inspired to deliver this message I needed now. I couldn't stop reading and listening and reading more. It hit me like a ton of bricks. I kept going, and I had this epiphany, like God meant for me to see this today. It was powerful. But then, just as quickly as that feeling washed over me, it was doused out, snuffed like a flame, when the preacher started preaching about the passage, and then what I took away from it was way off from what he was teaching. Now, despite how I may come off on social media, I'm not so arrogant to think that a 15-year-old kid knows more reading a passage out of context than a man who's dedicated his life to the study of it and is trying to teach it to me. Hardly. I make a practice to try not to question a master at their craft. However, it opened up this door in my mind that if I could feel like this and misinterpret what he clearly understands and I clearly don't, how often has that happened throughout history? So here we are. This doubt in my mind, but not a specific doubt, just the seed planted of questioning. Still, when I was forced to sit in church as a kid, I couldn't help but focus on everybody's outfits, what their morning routines must have been, how Gary got his 8 kids together and dressed into church after his wife left him, how Teresa and Mark could even show their face Sunday morning after what happened Friday night at the Looky-Loo. How this kid and that kid and that kid and this kid were all just fooling everybody, and how that one girl who was never really dolled up for school somehow Sunday mornings looked way cuter all gussied up. I was thinking about grape juice and how it dries my mouth out for the rest of the service, and how I didn't like taking communion anyway because it seemed really pagan and unholy. I thought about how I wished the preacher's wife was my mom because my mom lived far away. But then the preacher's sister almost was my mom, but my dad didn't want a woman who would make him happy, so he really never sealed that deal. My mind was everywhere, coming up with comedy bits, stories, perspectives, observations. I couldn't turn it off. I know. Undiagnosed and untreated ADHD. We all know. I thought about how embarrassing it was that somebody would be up there singing so horribly in front of everybody. Oh, it mortified me. While everybody was polite and gave their awkward and obligatory claps, I knew, they all knew that sucked. I can and have always been able to read people I don't really care about. I could see in their strained, pained faces. I heard the whispers and the backbiting, two-facedness. Now, they wouldn't say it to everyone, certainly not to the singer. But to anyone who would listen, snicker and not tell it, it was, "Ooh-wee, and I thought the Bible said make a joyful noise unto the Lord." Funny, we were all thinking it, but how mighty loving of you to say it. Of course, we could all agree that the true, loving part would have been to tell the person they were terrible before they got on stage and sang, but that too is problematic. Remember how they tell you that when you're nervous speaking in front of people to just picture everyone in their underwear or naked? Well, this is something I learned early, and this happened anytime I felt nervous or uncomfortable. I spent years breaking myself with this, but it's fair to say that even back then I was socially awkward and didn't feel very comfortable in church. So, yeah, I coped. And then I felt guilty because my coping mechanisms somehow felt wrong. It wasn't sexual. Sometimes it was. But we're told to picture people in their underwear or naked to ease our nervousness. Overthink that. So, see, I just didn't belong in church. I kept trying to, and all it did was make me feel more and more broken, unfixable. There was this guy a few years older than me who tried to reach out to me, kind of big brother stuff. He'd put notes on my car when I got up in the morning, and I'd go to school. I'd find a little note under my door handle or my windshield, notes of encouragement, a Bible verse. "I miss you, man," Actually, really, now describing it, it sounds really inappropriate and flirty. Up until recent years, I always looked at that as a kindness, him making an effort to keep me out of trouble and falling prey to the devil. Clearly, it didn't work. The backstabbery and hypocrisy of the leadership in many of the churches I witnessed growing up, not just the ones I went to, but ones that I knew in the private or business sectors, people who I knew who were churchgoers, they didn't behave in spiritual ways. There was a corruption of the soul at the core, at the foundation of who these people were. Some people. It wasn't like you could tell either. There isn't a genetic marker or a discernible trait between one person who is subject to cultism and another. And what makes someone just really love driving a certain auto brand and another swearing over their souls for political ideologies? This is why I'm deconstructing a culture of cultism. There was this apparent hypocrisy between the values of spirituality and the desires of humans, be it in the business sector, social settings, academia, or anywhere else. It's preaching morality and purity culture while secretly swinging when you go out of town on business trips. Now, look, I like the lifestyle just as much as any third wheel, folks, but if you love something, embrace it. Don't hide it and condemn it while doing it. crooked business dealings and scams. There's a reason so many pyramid schemes are centered around religions. Look at them. Look all of them. Look at their upline and their downline. Predators prey on the weak, vulnerable, and gullible. It's so disappointing. We all do it, though. Here are the rules to follow. We see those rules, we build buildings and gather to worship those rules, but when it comes to following the rules, it seems I'm not the only one who needs to find Jesus. I touched on this in previous episodes, how years ago, a bunch of drama went down at my grandmother's church after I'd moved away. This is all hearsay, so we'll just use vague and broad terms for the example, and like most everything I say, loosely based on a true story. Well, Dad and some of the hoity-toity people at Granny's church disagreed on something, irreconcilable differences, whatnot, who really knows or cares. They just broke off and started their own church. It just hit me like that. None of this means anything. Granny's church had been there, and the old building is still there, an historical site. But that church is over 100 years old. Now it's split in two because why? That's not an isolated tale. I've seen well over a dozen similar stories in different churches throughout my lifetime. I know they happen all the time. Churches split, people break away, branch off, or just start their own thing. So, ultimately, even the church isn't that important. The building, the people, the songs. Because what I took from that story is that all of that stuff, it's inside you. Or it isn't. And the fact is that it's all so made up that my dad and a bunch of people who weren't preachers just decided to have church in the back room of everybody's businesses or in their living rooms until they could rent or build a new church. You know, sometimes we don't really consider how churches start. We just know that they're there, and then they build newer, nicer, bigger buildings. But ultimately, it's all man-made. The church my dad made is still there in that county, just down the road from Granny's old church. Just brick and mortar. And memories. Dad was proud, man. Dad was so proud. He designed the building and stuff. It was his passion project. Dad was a builder of things, an architect at his core. He showed me the media setup, boasting about its cost and the sophisticated tech. He didn't bother to consult his son, the audio expert. I asked him, "Dad, where's your baptismal?" "We didn't have the budget for it," he said. "The baptismal?" We'll just go down to the river," he said. So just like my dad and some people who weren't preachers started their own church, they just decided that having a clean place to ceremonially cleanse someone of their sins and symbolically be reborn into the Spirit of Christ, well, that tub is too much. Nice fucking projector screen, though. I'm just saying that at some point, man overrides God. You have these two fractured factions who can't function as friends. So what? They just split up. At some point, these people felt like they had to leave that other church. And the people at the church felt like they had to be jerks or whatever. Who knows? Who cares? I don't. So you have the old and the new church who can't get along, so they just split up. Nothing matters. They weren't missed from the other church. That other church moved on. The new church grew. They just split up. And what was before just didn't matter anymore. Just like my first marriage. I got married to my daughter's mother in that church. Thankfully, I didn't need a tub. I did, however, need 5 lawyers because that didn't matter either. It all just ends until the next thing begins. It isn't so much that they started their own church or whatever. It's just that these people had no more training or theological expertise to break away from their church any more than the original church members had to behave in ways that would run everyone else off. Again, without specifics to the drama, this has happened all over with churches everywhere, right? It's that everyone involved was so fake and revealed to be hypocrites, total hypocrites on both sides, allowing their egos and pride to infiltrate their faith. Their actions and lack of brotherly love set in motion a soul-selling split. The problem with setting a fake example is when your facade fades and folks begin to see the facts, that do as I say, not do as I do attitude never holds up. Because when the truth does come out, you're exposed as a hypocrite, forever tarnishing your message, Mr. Falwell, etc. And sure, nothing really matters, right? But integrity and a deeper sense of human morals do. We are not beyond reproach for our actions. I sin every single day. I also have come to a different understanding of sin, as I spoke about in the Selling Our Soul series. And I'll get to a little bit more in the next episode. I believe this subject, the issue of sin and forgiveness, is the most vital and foundational. When I talk about sin, I can't discuss this in theological terms because while I am an ordained minister, the Universalist Unitarians will take literally anybody. I talk about sin in regard to violating either our own individual set of values and principles or those of your higher power. We can sin against ourselves. I do, twice a day sometimes. But there are a basic set of human morals. I believe many of these to be paralleled to the 10 Commandments, 7 deadly sins. They're in the Quran and Hinduism, and every widely accepted religion or spirituality on this planet. These are the principles that transcend any god man could make up, and I'll argue there's a reason these principles are present in every major religion. I'll cover this a lot more in depth in the next episode and in future episodes. The next episode, Divine Redefined, is where I break down all the major religions and doctrines of the world to show how similar we all are. If you compare the 10 Commandments of Christianity and Judaism to the 5 pillars of Islam, the 7 deadly sins from literature, and all these other religious principles, there are some answers about humanity and the rules we all live by, whether we know it or not. Look, if you're an atheist, I absolutely respect your beliefs or lack thereof. I still argue there's something that's above all else. Abstractly, I argue a God is worshipped, even if it isn't a cosmic or spiritual deity, in that not believing sort of becomes the belief system one's trying to escape. Now, I'm not saying to an atheist that there is a God. Sometimes, though, it can be overcompensation. You've got the angry at God atheist and the there is no God atheist. One needs to tell you they're an atheist, the other doesn't. It isn't that atheists are secretly spiritual. It's just that many atheists act more spiritual than so-called spiritual people. Yeah, it's that spiritual people act more like atheists. The bar is lowered. Or raised, however you see it. I've talked about before, and we'll talk about more in the future, my experience with Jesus Christ that tipped me toward a different perspective on the red words. When I went to college, I found more opportunity for exposure to diverse ideas. I took philosophy classes and theology classes and audited and read in the library. I talked to friends and Xeroxed their syllabi and referenced the reading material. To say I went down a rabbit hole, it's being nice. What I found in going away to college, even a few hours away to a state school in another part of the same state, was that I had permission for more autonomy of thought and more objectivity. There was no one around shaming me or giving me the side eye, except for this imaginary friend I never saw. My experience with Jesus Christ growing up was supernatural and mythical and unreal. Hard to swallow. I had all these logical barriers standing between me and the key to my salvation. I couldn't understand why I struggled so much sitting in that pew. It was because I didn't see Jesus as a superhero. I viewed Jesus more as a supernatural prophet. Not many religions see it that way, certainly not the one I grew up in. It isn't that I demand Jesus be a prophet, it's that learning his divinity was decided by the church, and what else was decided for the future of mankind at the First Council at Nicaea, I determined I couldn't build Jesus Christ on a bed of sand. I needed rock. Jesus as doctrine makes little sense to me. But Jesus Christ of Nazareth, the philosopher, he makes a whole hell of a lot of sense to me. The kind of sense I can share. Those words are important. And their importance is amplified and magnified exponentially when taken off the shelf of fairy tales, fear factors, and magic, and placed on a shelf next to Plato, Socrates, Kant, Hume, Nietzsche, Sartre, Descartes, Aristotle, Confucius, just to name a few. Then I just had to redefine divine, and that required stepping out of traditional Christianity. It was coming to understand Jesus Christ as less the earthborn son of the Almighty God, but as a man who was sent here somehow with a universally divine purpose and divine message. Before his time, taken too soon, who spoke reason and a higher social, spiritual, and moral calling to human beings who were virtually cavemen and women by today's standards. Evolved societies, but technologically and academically primitive. Still, despite the time, those messages are a roadmap for how to be a human. Rather than seeking oneness and understanding, humans seem content cherry-picking with willful ignorance and blind faith instead of turning to experts to continue to vet and vet and vet some more every single piece of that. Any doctrine. We should seek to prove or disprove, but we don't. Because here's the thing about Jesus Christ. Even if the Christian church and organized religion as we know it were to completely go away, the red words of Jesus would still prevail. Not because there's a mystical sky wizard making it immortal, but because the teachings hold and are some of the most valuable and most important mankind has ever had. Those parables and fables, a story with a moral, are fundamental to us moving forward. Now, isn't it funny how the church made this gamble centuries ago that men would follow a god but not a man? So they deified Jesus. But when academia and intellectualism prevail over yuck-yuckism, I believe the teachings would be so much more valuable. I think good people don't need to be convinced something makes sense unless you're making it not make sense. Make Jesus make sense. Teach Jesus as philosophy, because that's what it is. A philosophy of love, a philosophy of grace, a philosophy of forgiveness, a philosophy of life, a philosophy of hope. But the problem with that is what we've heard and said before. What does it say about someone who needs this supernatural thing to keep them from being horrible? The issue with people using Jesus as their ultimate salvation and their hope, they hang the very foundation of their beliefs and the fabric of their reality in the hands of a myth that has less evidence than Santa Claus. Even though in my culture, Jesus and Santa are kind of interchangeable, aren't they? Once that foundation is rocked, that fabric tears and everything unravels for them. This holy thing is it almost becomes a mascot for the organization rather than the organization existing for the holy thing. It's a cultism that soon breeds ego, narcissism, arrogance, and a pride they cannot back down from. It becomes a religion worshiping the self and how good and righteous the self is, with an afterthought to the God or deity they're supposed to be revering and deeming sacrosanct. I was born Presbyterian and christened into that faith. I was raised non-denominational, and I still have no idea what that means, beliefs-wise. It's a sort of gray area. You know what you're getting with Methodists, Lutherans, even Catholics. But with your good old generic dollar mart non-denom Christian, it's a crapshoot. Sometimes it's a quaint little country church. Sometimes you're walking into Godapalooza. Sometimes you're literally at a patriot Nazi church. Still, before I was given any other formal knowledge or training into anything whatsoever, I had this at least weekly ritual indoctrination session that I was subjected to, against my will. Before I was taught anything else, before I knew there was another idea or interpretation, I was born into and christened into the Presbyterian Church, non-consensually. And then my parents one day just decided they were wrong about the Presbyterian thing and went non-denominational. Whether it was personal or they just decided communion once a quarter wasn't enough, and maybe they wanted an every Sunday mid-service snack. I have no idea. My point is, I was indoctrinated into one religion, and then that wasn't even important to my parents to stay in that religion. So there I am, this gray area boy who doesn't belong. I've been christened, so I'm covered, right? But now, you say I need to feel this weird spiritual pull to come to the front of the church and hold everybody's lunch plans up so we can not baptize me until next Sunday. Why am I even bothering? I was christened. I'm not the one changing the rules midway through. You see, my parents didn't even have it together religiously. My grandmother devoted her life to starting her morning reading her Bible. She would transcribe it into spiral notebooks. Now, I can't say it brought her much peace in the end. Whatever her existence is now might be heavenly and peaceful, but watching her exit from this world in those last few days didn't leave me with an impression that her morning routine served a purpose beyond immediate comfort and distraction from how bad life really sucked in that shithole town. I've had no choice but to question things in my life. Things that made sense to other people seemed like a leap in logic to me. Still, I'm a man of deep spiritual faith. I just find it to be very intimate and personal, private. And my study of other spiritualities, religions, and even science reaffirms my beliefs. I've done the reading, the research, the self-reflection to be solid in my reasoning. Not immovable, but my faith isn't so shaky that science can disprove it. Science empowers my beliefs because science is a part of it, because everything is. My faith isn't so feeble that another point of view threatens it. I seek the similarities because that's where the truth lies, not so much in the differences. Now look, there may not be a God, any of them, much less mine or yours. The odds are, pardon the pun, astronomical. In fact, I have far more proof against than for. Most of my for is the inexplicable design and beauty of this natural world, things I'm just not smart enough to comprehend, but maybe some other humans are. But science doesn't explain everything for me. And maybe that's partly because I'm not smart enough in science to understand science. But Big Bangs aside, going from space dust to the intricacies of the human digestive system alone is beyond fathomable. Taking into consideration the digestive systems of every living digesting creature on this planet and the many, many other planets of possibility, well, there's a huge gap in logic for me, like for scientists and theologians alike. Some attribute that benefit of doubt gray area to as yet unexplained string theory or something. Others turn to magical sky wizards. For me, I can understand a concept of intelligent design better than just the randomness of it all. for me, the scientific explanation seems like a far greater stretch, that all of this just happens, that somewhere along the way, two wrong atoms don't collide in the wrong way, and it's just over for everybody for no real reason, out of the blue. Yeah, how would we explain that? We wouldn't be here. I believe that not asking that question, any question, leads to where we are in society today, with our division. In that, some of these domestic terrorists are making a claim now of question everything, except that for someone who spent his life devoted to that principle, and even created a whole show dedicated to the very idea, I find that problematic and insulting. In that, it's not question everything, it's question this and question that, but not this over here. Cherry picking, just like they do with their Bible and Constitution. It's this sudden urge to only question things that don't go your way. Except that there isn't a lifelong discipline in questioning, higher order thinking, research, deeper reasoning, critical thinking skills. These are things we learn. I call them disciplines because they take daily practice. And for people who are taught like I was, that questioning is sinful, that doubt is unchristian and blasphemy, that Jesus requires blind faith for those who believeth in him, and eternal hellfire and damnation of your soul if you don't. Go to school and become a preacher if you want to understand it. Otherwise, just shut up and sit in the pew and believe. But it's far too easy for the sheep to become lemmings. When looking at our society and those individuals who have followed the cult-like path of authoritarian fascism and treason, we have to ask how they got there. If we don't, we will only see history repeating itself again and again. Because I don't think we asked enough questions after World War II or after Nixon. American fascism was on the rise in the 1930s and 40s and into the 1970s, and even more prominently into the modern era. This might be the most divisive statement I'll make this episode. But how can we expect any segment of society to value fact and truth when their entire foundation of beliefs is built on a slab of fairy tales and unprovable stories mistranslated through thousands of years by men? They stake their entire eternity on a book they've probably never read front to back, and certainly lack the education or training and discipline to fully understand. They stake this eternal soul on this thing that their grandmother told them to believe was the truth, or they'd burn in hell. And don't ask no questions. Jesus hears everything. So when reasonable people confront them with evidence and fact, well, their reasoning is faulty from the start. Pride prevents them from coming to terms with it. Admitting this means questioning that. I buy into some of what these people say they do regarding Jesus Christ. But they've compromised their integrity and reasoning to justify their own positions for so long that truth is no longer a valid argument. They've been economically oppressed in the rural sticks, denied opportunities just like the rest of us. This isn't just geographically rural, this is culturally rural. Lacking a worldview or perspective, they've settled on feasting on fear and hate their celebrity news personalities have fed them. It's even worse when their religious leaders jump on the bandwagon, selling out their souls for political aspirations and considerations. Yes, we can make fun of them, I do, but the reality of it doesn't change. These are superstitious individuals who believe in wizardry and fantasy, burning bushes, except instead of Targaryen dragon eggs, we're left with stone tablets and rules nobody follows. Immortal saviors taken down by self-sacrifice. It's like Superman meets Harry Potter meets Game of Thrones. And to them, I've just blasphemed. Not that it matters, because to them, hell, to us, that doesn't matter. In America, freedom of speech wins over God every day, because you can have your right to believe whichever fairy tale you want to believe in, and all the doctrine I've discussed here can tell you that there is one true God. But ultimately, my First Amendment constitutional right to tell you that your God is fake wins out. There isn't anything anyone can do about it. I can shout, "God isn't real!" as loudly as I want, and we've decided that America wins over the Bible. We sold our souls, America, when freedom trumps doctrine. Pardon the pun. In 2016, Americans stood up with a candidate who had lied, bullied, and deplored his way to the Republican nomination. A month before the election, the Access Hollywood tapes came out. Prior to that, news that he had paid off a porn star to keep hush-hush about the sex he paid her for while his wife was recovering from giving birth to his son. Prior to that, he mocked a disabled reporter. Prior to that, horseface, Rosie O'Donnell, "I bet you look good on your knees. I like heroes he didn't get caught," and countless other horrible behaviors. Yet, millions and millions of people went out of their way to support that candidate. Millions of people in 2016 stood up for that candidate celebrated by the KKK and white nationalists. Nazis. Actual fucking Nazis. Millions of people who weren't Nazis or white supremacists rallied for that candidate and voted for that candidate. Well, people who said they weren't. And then they did it again 4 years later. Even more of them came out. When everything about that candidate violated every single tenet we have been given by every single religion on how to thrive and survive as a people. Millions compromised their core values to justify something. Greed, wrath, envy, lust, pride, sloth, gluttony. Oh, you talk about hitting for the cycle. I argue the transaction is complete. You've got your receipt. Game over. We were presented with this test, a wager for our souls. We, the species. So many doubled down and lost everything, forever losing the moral high ground. Sure, we'll never listen to another word you ever have to say about anything ever again. You're toast. That seat at the table for the grown-ups is taken, but losing their souls in the process. Who am I to say? Except that when examined through the lens of almost every major religion, standing on that side of history violated every core human principle we've got. So what could make someone do that? What could drive someone to sell their soul? It's what we just explored in the 4-part series, Selling Our Souls. When you raise a society to be good, or they'll go to hell, when your social norms and mores and customs and laws and rules and day-to-day behaviors are regulated by mystical threats of ghosts and eternal damnation, suffering, and torture, well, surprised that you get what you give. Chaos. You breed a society of borderline sociopaths who are only morally and ethically confined to some 2,000-year-old definition that keeps getting changed and redefined by every politician and preacher that wants to manipulate said sociopaths. What we're seeing in America, our society, is a dumbing down of our intellect and critical thinking, and a numbing down of our compassion and empathy. Education has been demonized, corrupted, and sold for profit for too long, with that profit not benefiting the actual educators and certainly not the indebted former students struggling through stagnant wages. Whether it's academics or spirituality, we don't address actual learning. We address standards and test scores, bullet points and highlights. Our society is a sexually repressed mess because we've allowed religion to infect our policy. and allowed conservative Nancy-pansies the run of the roost while the rest of us just kind of roll our eyes. It's costing our society far too much. I saw a bumper sticker that said, "Self-esteem saves lives." This hit me because religion in this country is just as much about oppression and ostracization as it is about community and fellowship. It's about, we aren't ready, and that means nobody can be until we are. If you're turning to religion, you should be turning for a positive. Well, you should be turning for a therapist first. I mean, but you shouldn't be made to feel worse than you did coming into it. But you also shouldn't be falsely made to feel better. In that, the power from the pulpit is real. What a preacher says carries more weight than most other people. Same with politicians and therapists. We can all agree that the basic core human principles of not lying is truly a commandment from God. Then why do we allow religious leaders and politicians to lie? The numbing down of our empathy and compassion, our humanity, our souls. Sadly, I've seen it through art, comedy, and more. But it's that same numbing down that made Black Lives Matter and the Me Too movements necessary. It's telling the jokes so much we become numb to the actuality of the subject matter. It's numbing down our empathy and compassion to the point that we don't care who's hurt, so long as we get to have a good laugh. Here's an example. A joke I heard my dad tell growing up, and forgive me in advance. Would you rather be black or gay? The answer was black, because then you don't have to tell your parents. That was a joke white people told a lot. I heard it multiple places, not just my dad. And white people chuckle and laugh. I heard black people chuckle and laugh. I even heard gay people chuckle and laugh at that joke. Whether it's, laughing along to keep from a confrontation, or whether the joke had some humor to it, it's still a very tasteless joke that numbs us down. After all, if we chuckle at the joke, we don't have to address the truth behind the punchline that so many LGBTQ people have had to face the harsh reality of telling their parents and the horrors of being ostracized and homeless and forced into subhuman circumstances as teenagers because mom and daddy's DNA created something that mama and daddy didn't want to face on account of that time in the barn when he and his brothers was just boys being boys. Faith, religion, spirituality, these things are designed to bring us a oneness with the universe and a higher power. Indoctrination is trauma. Think of it as spiritual assault. God, that sounds like a career ender right there, right? Make it a meme. But it doesn't make my statement any less true. You're betting your soul that you're right about your fairy tale. But when you bring someone else into that, you're assuming responsibility for their souls too. Indoctrination, which is more aptly descriptive of what many of these cultists have experienced in their lives with religion, sports teams, politicians. It's a poisoning of the mental, emotional, and spiritual well. It's forced spiritual servitude. It's the only way many businesses, brands, candidates, and religions exist today. Get them hooked, they'll stick around. You get them hooked on the mascot, they'll buy your product no matter what you put in it or how you serve it to them. And that cultism is everywhere in our culture. It's traumatic. And as AOC bravely stated several years ago, trauma builds on itself. Some turn to religion, some turn to a politician, many should turn to a therapist. The religion will create more trauma, the politician will exploit that trauma, while the therapist can help you process and learn from that trauma. I don't think my journey through deconstruction is all that different than most, if I'm being honest. It all comes down to something or someone snapping us out of that cult trance, opening our eyes and seeing the bigger picture. Religion divides, spirituality unites. In the next episode, Divine Redefined, I'm breaking down the major religions to find out how we're similar. After that, I'm going to discuss my journey into and out of the Republican Party. More than that, I'm going to call out some of the toxicity in our society and hopefully not end my career before it's really just getting started. Just like I broke down my religious journey, my political journey is also very private but vital to this point. It's all coming up as I deconstruct a culture of cultism. Thanks for joining me. Check out some of my other videos on YouTube. I've got all my original music in a playlist for you. You can follow me on TikTok, like, share, subscribe to this channel, and do all the things I need you to do to help me thrive and succeed. And if you like this series, consider a donation to Cash App or subscribe on Patreon. I'm Josh Brandon, and I'm overthinking everything.